Humans have been around for about 200,000 years. And let's be real, most of that time was not great. But in all those millennia of just trying to survive, could there be one single solitary year that was worse than all the rest? Well, that's exactly what we're going to try and figure out. Yeah, our source material doesn't exactly pull any punches. History is full of these incredible moments of triumph, for sure, but it's also a story of just unimaginable suffering. So let's brace ourselves for some pretty grim details and try to find the absolute bottom of the barrel. I mean, it's a massive question, right? Was the worst year defined by a horrific war, a devastating plague, a total economic collapse? Or was there one year that somehow managed to be a perfect storm of all of it at once? Okay, so let's start with the years where the disasters were pretty much our own fault. We're going to look at the times when war, political chaos, and just plain economic stupidity created a literal hell on Earth. First up, we have 1918. Now, you probably know this year as the brutal final chapter of the Great War. But what it also did was unleash a far more efficient killer on the world, the Spanish flu. And this is what's just staggering when you look at the numbers. World War I was one of the most horrific conflicts in history, right? It killed 5 million people in its final year alone. But the Spanish flu, it just completely dwarfed that, killing up to 50 million people around the world. And the really scary part? It was especially deadly for young, healthy adults. And the way people died was absolutely terrifying. Doctors at the time had a name for it: heliotrope cyanosis. Basically, as a patient's lungs filled up with fluid, their body was starved of oxygen. Their skin would start to turn this deep, bluish-purple color, starting with their fingers and their lips, until their entire body with this horrifying color. Just a truly awful way to go. And if you thought a globe-spanning pandemic wasn't enough, 1918 also saw the climax of the Russian Revolution. We're talking civil war, the assassination of the entire Romanov family, and the rise of Lenin's brutal dictatorship. All while, over in France, the Treaty of Versailles was being written, a document that was so harsh on Germany, it basically set a ticking time bomb for the next World War. Then, of course, you have the years of total financial ruin. In 1929, the stock market crash kicks off the Great Depression. 1 out of every 4 Americans was out of a job. Things got so grim that hotel clerks in New York would reportedly ask guests checking in if they needed a room for sleeping or for jumping. Then you fast forward to 2008. The collapse of Lehman Brothers triggers a global crisis, and millions lose their homes and their jobs. In fact, that freeze in home construction is a direct reason why we're seeing the housing shortages we have today. From there, things just escalate. We have to talk about what was arguably the absolute peak of human-on-human violence, the years 1942 and 1943. This period was the absolute height of World War II, a time of just unprecedented global warfare and genocide. 2 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's the number of casualties from just one battle, the Battle of Stalingrad, which wrapped up in early 1943. And that was just a single battle in a war that was raging across the entire planet, right alongside the systematic horrors of the Holocaust. A truly, truly terrible time to be alive. But you know, humanity can't take all the credit for making life miserable. Now we're going to shift gears and look at the years when the planet itself seemed to just turn on us, unleashing plagues, famines, and geological nightmares. Okay, let's jump back to 1347. This is the year a disease shows up in Europe that would literally change the course of history. The bubonic plague, better known as the Black Death. Spread by fleas on rats, it was fast, it was agonizing, and it felt completely unstoppable. And you can see the impact right here. We're not talking about a small outbreak. This thing wiped out roughly 1/3 of the entire population of Europe in just a handful of years. The entire social order was just upended. The massive labor shortage that followed actually helped bring down the whole feudal system in some parts of Europe. It completely changed everything. And the medical cures they came up with, oh man, it just shows you how completely desperate and in the dark they were. One of the more popular treatments was to take a live chicken, pluck its feathers off its back and bottom, and then strap it directly onto a victim's swollen sores. The hope was that the chicken would just absorb the disease. They would repeat this until either the patient or the chicken died. And spoiler alert, it was almost always both. Next up, a year you definitely know, 1492. But for the millions of people who are already living in the Americas, Columbus's arrival wasn't a year of discovery. It was the start of an absolute catastrophe they call the Great Dying. 90%. That's the estimated percentage of the indigenous American population that was wiped out by European diseases like smallpox and measles. See, they had zero natural immunity, so what happened was one of the largest and fastest population collapses in all of human history.
And then you have the volcanoes. It's kind of wild to think that a single massive eruption is enough to throw the entire planet into chaos. Back around 73,000 BC, the Toba's supereruption almost wiped us out completely. Way later, in 1601, an eruption in Peru caused a summer with no sunshine, which led to a famine in Russia that was so bad there were reports of widespread cannibalism.
I mean, to really put that Toba eruption into perspective, scientists believe it created what's called a genetic bottleneck. It might have reduced the entire human population on Earth to as few as 3,000 people. As our source puts it, the entire human species could have fit inside Madison Square Garden twice. That is how close we came to just blinking out of existence. So, we've seen war, we've seen plague, we've seen economic collapse, but now we get to the year that many historians argue was the absolute, undisputed worst. A year that basically took all the most terrible parts of our other contenders and rolled them into one horrifying package. And the winner, or I guess the loser, is the year 536 AD. Now, to most of us, that's just some obscure date. But for the people who were actually alive then, it was the beginning of one of the darkest, most miserable periods in all of recorded history.
It was a true greatest hits of awfulness. It kicked off with a massive volcanic eruption that created this mysterious fog, a fog that plunged the northern hemisphere into a dim, cold twilight for 18 straight months. Global temperatures plummeted, it snowed in the summer in China, causing a famine that starved up to 80% of the population. And as crops failed everywhere, the Justinianic plague, a deadly precursor to the Black Death, broke out in Europe. And if all that wasn't enough, at the exact same time, a massive El Niño event was causing floods and famine in South America. It was a simultaneous worldwide catastrophe.
You know, looking back at a year like 536 it's really sobering. It shows you the incredible, almost unbelievable hardships that humanity can endure. But it also kind of begs the question, right? Now that we've seen what the worst of the past looked like, what might the next worst year have in store for us?